And thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for having me for a second try. I'm Anna Provoost. I'm from Belgium, Antwerp. It just rained here, so we're very relieved. I'm an author. I'm a fiction writer. I think that I will tell you a bit about what I do on the books that are relevant for this discussion or this talk today. I'm a pretty strict fiction writer, and I've written one of the books that I've written is a reconstruction of the story of Noah and the Ark. I will tell you, it's been translated in English. It's called In the Shadow of the Ark. And I'm doing that from a perspective of an atheist, as an atheist writer. This has been a bit confusing for my readers because if you go back to Genesis, to a biblical story, people seem to assume that is because you either defend the point of view or support it. I'm not sure. But in Belgium, this has been going pretty well because in Belgium, people understood that I was writing this as a metaphor for the rising of the water. I wrote this story at the end of the previous millennium. And that was the moment, I feel, that we felt that something irreversible was happening. So I've been this fiction writer for a long time in Belgium. I write for young adults, I write for adults, I write for children, I write essays, I write poetry, and I write theater plays. I write everything. And at some point, and that's probably why we're here together, I felt I needed to write a sermon. Where is it? This is not the book. Well, I can't show it because there's too much sunlight here. But it doesn't matter because this is a book in Dutch anyways. That's the language I write in. But the sermon that I wrote is an atheist sermon, and it's been translated, and it's on my website. You can consult it there for free. And this was, in a way, written as a consequence of that Bible book that I wrote. It felt like I had to give some explanation. Apart from that, I'm a mom of 3 children. I'm 58 years old. I'm pretty, known as an activist in the sense that I come what people could call messages or points of view. And we discuss about those. And these are in my books. And I use my books to present to the readers elements of beauty and elements of thoughts, I think. Is there anything else you want to know about me?
That's good. So what are some of your thoughts and insights?
I'm not sure about me.
That's
perfect.
Maybe
important to say, I forgot to tell you this. Well, I told you that Dutch is my native language and my second language is English. But I was looking at your other shows and I discovered that you're based in Minneapolis. Is that where you are?
Yep, Minneapolis, Minnesota.
That's great. Yeah, that's great because coincidentally, my husband and I have lived there in the 80s for almost a year. Oh, my heart melts when I saw somebody of Minnesota, Minneapolis.
Yeah, it's gets cold here though. I'm not a fan of the snow, and the driving in winter is quite unpleasant.
Is it cold now?
Oh no, right now it's pretty good. It's like 70. So.
Yeah, well, I've experienced your winters twice, so I have a sense.
So tell me more about your books. What is your perspective taking, for example, Noah's Ark from a religious that is typically from a religious perspective and portraying it from a secular perspective? How does that differ from the classical religious doctrine?
Well, first of all, my main character, the young woman that tells the story, is not an atheist. She's a polytheist. So she believes that there must be multiple gods, and she truly doesn't understand that if a god comes to you and tells you that he's going to flood the world, then why don't you start worshiping a different god? So for me, this was as a writer exercise in, well, both of trying to be very historic, because that's what I try to do, and try to be very psychological, because I really wanted to get into the world, the mindset of that save themselves, and that save themselves by proclaiming that they've been chosen. So I sort of dramatize that, and I show that this is very problematic for the people who are on the ark, who save themselves, um, because there's a big feeling of guilt that starts to come up. We think I've had all read children's books in where the fate of the animals has been dramatized. I was not so interested as a writer in these animals, even though I'm a vegetarian, etc. But that's a whole different matter. But as a child, I already wondered what to the animals that were not the couples, the two by twos. So as I was writing this story, I certainly had to think of the people that had to be left behind, and imagining that there would certainly have been people that tried to crawl on that ship. The people who were chosen would have had to kick them off. They would have had to push them away. So this is basically, this was for me a major metaphor of what we are gonna have to do as nations and as a people when the water rises, and we have to decide who gets remain on the ship and who has to go, who has to stay behind.
And
I'm not
what is
sure
your
if that.
take on that?
What is that?
And what was your conclusion? What do you think of these people who are on the ark, who were commanded by God to save themselves, but had to kick off everyone else?
Well, first of all, it's important to point out that as writers, I feel that we are not condemning our characters. We are basically looking at them. We're observing them, and we are showing their human face. I'm very much alert to that. I'm trying not to be judgmental, trying not to be misunderstanding of their motives, because I think motives in humans are always very complex. And one of my major points of view in life is that we are not a consequent species. Humans have big brains, and they have a lot of space in those brains, and so much space that there's room for completely contradictory opinions. We see that in everyday life all the time. I mean, we're surrounded, all of us, by people who will say, oh, I have to fly less, or we have to be more aware of using our car. But at the same time, think that they deserve that vacation, or that it's really important for them to travel to another continent because they have to learn and they have to develop and they have to understand other peoples. So these seem to be very contradictory. I think we're the only species who can do that. I think in animals, I'm not sure, I don't know if there's any studies there. It would interest me to know that if a dog, for example, can want two things at the same time, but we can. We certainly can, and we see it everywhere. So I'm trying to look at humans from that perspective, and I think cognitive dissonance is a very major part in our way of thinking. So I look at these characters and I see that they're torn, that they're devastated, that they're impotent in the sense that there's not much to do about themselves, but they feel enormous guilt. And one of the conclusions in my book is that my main character is actually looking at these people. But because I haven't told you that, but my main character is a stowaway. She is not a person from the Bible. She is smart enough to make one of the sons of Noah fall in love with her right before the flood came. And therefore, he hid her on the big boat. So she's a great, character for me to use as a writer, to look at these people who say themselves that they've been chosen. And I think that what I do as a writer is I try, even though I'm an atheist, I try to be extremely tolerant and understanding of what it is that humans look for when they look for religion. And this is also resulting from my humanistic points of view. I know that whenever we're talking about atheism, I feel that we very often fall in two groups. One group thinks or claims that religion is extremely harmful, and another will probably, and that's where I'm in, see that, but also want and be willing to see the other side of it, the good things that religion did. But more than that, we will feel that it would be against our basic human attitudes to say, you're a fool if you believe in this extreme God, or you're stupid, or you don't want to see the light, or you're ignorant. Because one of the things that, as a humanist, I strongly believe is that, especially as an artist, and I want to link this to my being an artist and being a writer, is I've tried, while aging and while writing, to look at what religion is. And to me, religion is very comparable to art. It's very to what I do. What I do in everyday life, it's my job, is I try to create metaphors for the things I do not understand, I do not grasp, I cannot find words for it. And I'm thinking that that is exactly also what people do when they are religious. Now, of course, and there's the sermon. That's where the sermon comes into view. One of the things that's always been told to me is that that whenever you talk about religion, you have to be careful, because the one religious person is not like the other, and there's degrees of being religious. And it brought me to creating an instrument that I've called the religiometer. And it's what should I call it? It's a scale in which you can discover from when how unreligious or religious you are, or one is. And what it does is it makes claims, and as soon as you stop subscribing to the claim, as soon as you stop agreeing with the claim, you can decide that that is where you are in the scale of being religious. So at the bottom, at scale 1, or grade 1, I call it grades, is the atheist. But at stage 5, between 5 and 6, is stage deistic. And deistic means that that's whoever says, there's a power and there's something out there. And apart from that, there's nothing I can say about it. And what I state in my sermon is that these are the people that we as atheists will be able to converse with and talk to in times of crisis. And we will still be able to talk to people who are in grade 6 and 7, but they've reached grade 7, they are showing up, or the religiousness shows a God that becomes personalized, that has traits. These are the theistic people, and they do not only say that there is a God, but they also say that they can know what the characteristics are of that God. And then there's degree in what they can say about him. What is remarkable is that his traits are human. Will ever say that a God barks or the God barks? As you can tell, I'm very much focusing on monotheistic religions. For your information, I was raised Catholic, like everybody else in Belgium. So it is not like in the United States that you even have to ask. If you belong to my generation, most probably, not all the time, but most probably you will be raised Catholic. And what I'm aware of, where I think, oh, here it becomes difficult for us atheists to talk with religious people, is when the God with the plan comes in. Because if there's a God with a plan, then my next question is he having a plan for you as a religious person, or does he also have a plan for me as an atheist? And that of crisis, it will be very, very difficult to communicate with people who are religious, because they can say, well, God's plan is that you're not going to be on the ship. Or this is, the fact that our, what do you call it, top and the bottom of the world are melting is because God considers this part of the plan. So basically, what I try to do as an author is I try not to be judgmental towards the fact that people believe in an extra material power as such. Because I think that what they are doing, trying to find a metaphor for the void, for the things that even I think even as atheists, we come across things that we find hard to find words for or to explain. I've used the metaphor in my sermon of the hard disk. Sometimes we have to admit that our hard disk is too small. I'm old enough to remember, I think you're too young for this, Tom, to remember that our computer at the time would suddenly turn black and they would have these green letters and it would say 404, error. I loved that. I loved the moment. It was terrifying.
I hated that moment. I don't.
But I love that moment if I consider it as a existential experience that we all at some point. And what I'm doing when I meet that moment, when it turns black and I see error, is I probably will try to find words, and I won't always find them, but what I will probably do is I will try to create art. So putting art and religion on one level has really helped me to become acceptant of the fact that there are people in the world who have probably something extra. They have a God spot, and I blame them for it. And I can also not judge them for it. And I cannot yell at them. And I will probably not even be able to convince them ever. But if I want to keep my human face, I have to accept. It is as if it's a person with two noses. If I'm a human, I will have to accept that there's something in their mind that is different, but I will invite them that even if they have a God in their head, I will invite them to keep that God there and not, I don't know if this is a word in English, extrapolate. No, it's probably
Extrapolate, yes.
French. But yeah, it to me, because I choose not to be part of it. And this mutual respect that would come from that is, I think, the direction we need to take.
Oh yeah,
I see
absolutely. I
that
would
people
totally agree.
are reacting, but I'm really not competent of reading and speaking at the same time. So if anybody is asking me anything, Tom, you will have to be the
For sure.
Yeah.
So I totally understand your argument there that if people are religious and they believe that a deity is telling them to do something, there's no way to convince them otherwise. You can't like present evidence and say, "Oh, your God was wrong. This is not what he was thinking." It's essentially that they believe in that being with absolute certainty or absolute faith, and there's nothing beyond that that could cause them to question, which can lead to a lot of very bad consequences. They will never change their mind. So, for example, global warming, they think that God will never cause the destruction of the world again, and so we don't have to worry about global warming, but it will end up harming many, many millions of people.
But
so in those
that's
kinds
when
of
you are
cases,
dealing with the guys and the girls who are in the high scale of the religiometer. So I think for me, it'd be extremely interesting to ask these people to think about which grade they're in, and to agree with that grade, and to agree with the fact that this religiometer stops at point 10. That's the most extreme. But of course, it can go further. So once you have a God with a plan, and this plan means that God can instrumentalize people and use them as an element to make his reign happen. It also means that you can make a bomb belt and get on a bus and make yourself on road. That is where as atheists, and probably, and that's what I ask for in this sermon, the people who are the moderate believers, they should be the ones that are challenging the ones that are in the higher degrees. And I think it's really important that we communicate with those people and tell them how important it is that they go to the ones that are higher on the scale, because if we tell them, we polarize. If they tell them, there will be better, there will be more acceptance for their argument. This is an appeal to people who are in grades 4, 5, 6, and 7 of the religiometer, and this is also how I've brought it to a Belgian audience. Now, I must say that, of course, I am talking from Europe, from a completely different perspective than yours. Being non-religious today in Belgium, I hope I'm not saying anything that doesn't match the numbers. My impression is that that's the default position. If you're religious, you'll have to explain that. Everybody will, upon meeting, will more or less assume that you're not religious, or certainly not high on the scale. We have a term that I think is even introduced in English, that comes from the Dutch, and it's called called Itzism. I would translate that by schism. And I think there's quite a few people that still would support that grade on the religio. They say there must be something, and that's where it stops. I don't know if there's much research there. I'm a fiction writer, so you're not talking to a specialist on I haven't done any studies or any questionnaires or whatever. But I can see in the assumptions that you have, for example, on the public broadcasting, the assumptions there, to my feeling, are that you will not be religious. That's where they start from.
And what is your perspective of other countries? So, like, where countries where the majority are in the higher numbers, do you think that the moderates can still be a successful communication device to be able to change the view of the more extremist groups?
That what can be a device?
Talking to the moderates, the people in the middle. You said talking to like the 4, 5, 6, and 7s, because like in America we have a much larger number of 8s and 9s and 10s. Same with the Middle East. There's a lot larger number of the more extreme, higher in numbers, and the moderates are ignored in these countries. They're seen as people on the fence and then not to be trusted. And so in these kinds of cultures, do you think that the same strategy can be effective?
I would advise the strategy, but I don't know if it's going to be effective. I don't have that glass ball. But my gut feeling is we don't have much other choice. I mean, what are we going to do? Is it helpful to polarize? Is it helpful to? I mean, I want to point out that this is a strategy that I carry as a. But I would never know what I want to advise to other people, in the sense that I know that there's people out there like you, Tom, and in the past, all the people, Dawkins and the four, what do you call them? The four horse riders or something?
Horsemen, yeah, the four horsemen.
Yeah, I think both trajects, do you say that? Traces, ways of working have their legitimacy, but I have no other way around the way I feel that I have to do it. And I'm confident, or I'm convinced, that there's quite a few people like me. There's people who are very much in the more, what do you call it, strategic and offensive and debating modus. But I think there's a lot of people that maybe are less visible, that would think, let's put oil on the waves. Is that an expression in English? Rather than put a match the oil. Let's try to understand what's driving them, and let's try to talk to the moderates, that they go and talk to the more severe or the stricter or the ones that are higher on the scene. Because I have not so much perspective about how it's going there in the United States. I haven't been there for many years. But the way it is going now, feel it's not the right direction for you guys. There's a lot of polarization, I feel, and I'm saying this as a nitwit, I didn't study this, but I'm looking at the country where I used to live. There's polarization everywhere, but it's worse in the United States. And I wonder, if the strategy of having heavy, strict debates, if that is going to resolve the situation. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting that there are different methods that work for different people, and taking a softer approach can definitely be more convincing to a lot of people. And some people just really like debates. They're
Yeah,
convinced
I
by
can
the
see that.
competitive
Yeah,
side.
yeah,
Especially in America, we like sports and competition and things, football.
mm,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
treating debate like a sport can be very helpful for some people who are into that kind of thing. But what was it that inspired you to write your books in the first place? How did someone in the audience asked if you were a deconvert? So you said you were brought up Catholic and then became an atheist.
Hmm. Um,
How did that happen?
yeah, this was like a mass movement, I would say. I think a lot of us who are now atheists, there's some of them that were raised what we would call, in city environments, and their parents were already early socialists, etc. Um, but that's not the majority. The majority of the atheists today have had. I was brought up in the 60s and 70s, and this went very, very softly. It went from a belief that Jesus loved, and that was all we could say, hair and up with people, and that whole generation, to gently not telling your grandparents anymore, and still going to funerals and or religious funerals, and have weddings and communions, etc. But using that more as a moment of being together and of connection with your family, with the group. Um, so we probably now all want to say that we suddenly saw the light, or that we were so hurt as to see that we had been told stories all our lives. But it was so general, and I see it in my bubble and outside of my bubble, in my whole generation. Even my parents came with me, and they are at that stage now. They're deep in their 80s. I think this is a movement that has a lot to do with good education, with very good protection. So my gut feeling, without wanting to sound like Europe has the Holy Grail or something, but the aversion that I still feel in the United States for everything that is in common, like health care and education, it's so precious to share that, and to share your risks, and to pay a lot of taxes, and to make sure that everything you have is, as much as it can, common, and is healthy, because it's well paid for, because we all paid a lot of taxes. Um, I'm so convinced of that model, and I know that in the United States, you defend that model, you're so easily considered a socialist, um, which I don't deserved, because I think in a country of like Belgium, I keep being astonished at how safe I feel, and how much I feel protected from personal catastrophes. Of course, not protected from heat waves and all that. That's not what I mean. But I mean that as an artist, I can survive this country, even though not many people can read my books, because not many people read my language. It's my children can study, and it doesn't. We are we feel very safe. The level of our health. This creates a bonding and a solidarity that, of course, is that. And there's a lot of of whole waves, also in my country, of people arguing about that and thinking that it's the wrong track. But in general, I think even though we also have poverty and we also have housing problems and all that, I think it's nothing compared to where the United States is at now. So I think willingness to be extremely religious has a lot to do with the feeling that you have to have a backup because nothing is sure in your life, and that the future is terrifying. I think once you feel that there's a whole, I don't know, there's a word in Dutch for this, vangnet. Maybe there's someone who, it's a net where they catch you when you fall.
Safety net.
Safety net, yeah. Well, I'm just improvising now. I would think that that is something that as if I were a politician, I would sit on that horse, and I would think that that is where we have to start education, early age education, making sure that in schools religion is not an option, in the sense that, because that's still going on now, that you can actually choose your religion. I think if you have a course in the school that is called religion, they should talk to you about all the religions and show the similarities. But of course, if you're going to split up your students and they're going to be following classes with people who are of the religion, it's a cul-de-sac, you go in and it's hard to come out again because you don't have the full scope, you don't have the full perspective. So these are the things that I would work on rather. I mean, maybe that's a softish artistic approach, maybe it's my female approach. This is all possible. I mean, it's all up to you to judge about that. But these are the things that I would bet on.
Yeah, that's actually something Daniel Dennett, one of the four horsemen you mentioned earlier, he has advocated for the same thing, that we should have religious studies where in schools kids are taught about all the different religions, and that will help to better educate them. And also, like what you were saying earlier, that when people feel safe and comfortable, they don't have as much need to believe in God and to ask for help from a God if they can find places in their community for the help that they need. And I feel like that was something, a part of my childhood as well, that because I didn't have the social safety net, I was depending on religious belief as a hope that the God could help me or do something for me that the community wasn't. So I definitely can empathize with those kinds of ideas, that making the
Well, and
community
then
safer and better.
and then that's
Go ahead.
exactly. Oh, sorry, were you finished?
No, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Because as you're answering, it comes back to me that you actually asked what brought me to writing that book, and that's the psychological element for me has been very important, and that's what you just come to point out, that there's a psychology there and a need for being taken care of and a need for belonging, and if we can better take care of that, maybe the extreme of the scale will not be so necessary anymore.
That leads to a question from the chat. Marty Mad Scientist asks, he was brought up in a very agnostic country as well, where there's not a lot of religious people, and he wants to know if people in those countries are naive about how religious America and countries like ours can be, because there's such strong beliefs in these systems that it's hard to understand just how influential they can be on policy and decisions and what goes into schools. So, like the Texas Board of Education here in America essentially gets to decide what goes in all the textbooks because they buy the most textbooks. And so, because of the way that we determine which books should be sold. The biggest companies offer the books to Texas first, and if they get accepted, well, then they just get accepted everywhere because they're the ones who buy the vast majority of them.
Well, my answer to that question is yes, indeed. I think we have no clue. I think it's terrifying to realize that you don't know it. But that's very much how we, or maybe I should just be this person, how I look at the United States at this moment. I know the country somewhat. The recent developments have been absolutely flabbergasting us. We look at you and we go like, what is this? I remember the days when our children are younger, or when my husband and I looked at each other and we were frustrated for not having stayed in the United States. We couldn't have because we weren't on the right visa. We didn't have a green card. We were there as exchange students. But of course, as a writer, you think, oh, if I had written my books in English, I would have had a much bigger audience. Well, the last 6, 7, 8 years, I don't think that anymore. I'm happy I came back.
That makes sense. I can understand that for sure.
Is that offensive to you guys?
No, I feel like most Americans agree in a lot of ways that whichever half of America you're on, they feel very dissatisfied with the other half of America at this point. It's very it's very polarized, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
I did have a question about authorship. Do you like, because I'm working on a book with a co-author, do you have a publication company that helps you do advertising, or do you do that mostly on your own?
Advertising?
Yes. So like for
Like
your
for
book,
your books?
buying ads, making up websites, getting speaking events, doing those kinds of things.
No. Belgium is very well. Belgian authors are probably very surprisingly different from American authors, but my feeling is that we basically write our books, publish them, and see what happens.
Gotcha.
And I think there's a few people in Belgium that have like an agent, but not very many. I certainly don't have an agent. And yeah, it's a peaceful life being an author in Belgium. You just have time to sit down and write your books, and every so often, and by every so often I mean maybe twice a month or 3 times or 4 times a month, somebody will ask something from you, such as give a reading or speak or open a festival or something. No, well, yeah, especially now after COVID, it's very, very quiet. And no, people get on Facebook and have Instagram, and the really biggies, they have websites, and maybe that's done by their publisher, but I wouldn't know that. I certainly don't do it. And if I have a website, I have my web mistress who will fill out the gaps as I send them to her, and that's it. Yeah. Are you worried about your
Yeah,
book
that's really
coming up?
different.
That you, yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
I
And
can't give
here
you
you
any advice
need
there.
an agent. Yeah, here everyone has an agent. You have to have an agent to even present your book to one of the bigger companies. They don't accept any submissions unless you have an agent. And so it's a really complicated process because there's just so
Yeah.
many people writing books here that it's an oversaturated market, and that they need to like filter out all the different things. And there's so much self-publishing on Amazon that it's very complicated publishing a book here and getting like an agent and a publicist. It's quite the process.
But it's true that for us, our publisher does like anything that has to do with the translation rights, etc. So if my books have been translated in 20 languages, And I didn't have to do any of those. Just, was all agreed upon between two publishers, and other publisher agreed upon a translator. And if I spoke the language, I got to look at the translation. But if I didn't, this just all happened. But see, I've been in this field for 30 years and longer, and the changes have been so different, so big. So it compares to how I started out. This is
Tell me
changing
more
so
about,
fast in that field.
for sure. Tell me more about the atheist sermon. Why did you make a sermon, and what does it mean to be a sermon, and what is the goal of the sermon?
Yeah, that's a good question. This I did this long time ago, but I think it basically started by incidents in my life. I live in a big city in Antwerp, and I am also surrounded by people with Islamic belief. And I have had some incidents. One of them was that a car, I'm a biker, and a car drove really close to my bike and almost hit me, and did the same with another biker. I could see that, and then the car had to stop at the stoplight. And it was a warm day, and I started talking to the driver, and I said, "Well, you almost hit me. Why being so fast and careless?" And he answered, "Well, don't worry, my lady. God is taking care of you and I." And that moment, I realized that I had nothing to say, that I could not defend myself. I hadn't given religion much thought, and I hadn't given my being not religious anymore any thought. I was in my 30s. I was having children, making family, rebuilding a house, etc. And realizing that, I knew that we were, as atheists, had stopped talking about being atheist in Belgium. I mean, I can only speak for my bubble, because I remember in the United States, yes, you would go up to somebody and you would ask, "What religion are you?" That was something you would never ask in Belgium. You would never meet up with somebody, and that conversation wasn't held. And I sort of, it started out by our radio. We have public radio, and in that public radio, we have convictions, like different religions, and they get 1 hour a week to the audience. And what I liked about these programs was that they didn't have, like Belgians very often have, that they weren't being explicit about where they were positioned in their beliefs. In Belgium, it's sort of taboo to say who you vote for, and it's taboo to say how much you earn, and it's a taboo to say what your religion is. We're very different from the American. But having lived in America, I had learned to really appreciate how explicit Americans are and how clear about where they're at. So I realized that I loved the literally what do you call it, genre of the sermon, because as a child I had always listened to it, and I think it's beautiful to listen to people who are convinced of what they're saying and who stand for what they're saying. So I wanted to explore the genre. Is that an English word? It's
Yes, genre.
Yeah.
It's like GNERE, something like genre, GNRA, something like that.
Yeah. And then that's how I decided that I wanted to write a sermon, and I called it "Beloved Unbelievers." And then the subtitle is "Atheist Sermon." And what I do is, for example, I make a plan, a plan of action for atheists that it considers of different levels, and one of the religiometer is one of the elements that I call for the atheists and the believers in the middle section to realize that there's differences in religiousness. The other things that I do is I want words back. What I do is I start with saying that there's two big philosophical questions that already in the accent side, already 10,000 ago, people were struggling with. The first one is, what does the universe look like? And then as a sub question, where is my spot in it? And I state that is the real religious question, because that is where you answer, yes, there is an extra material power, or no. But the other question that we've always had through our 10,000, 100,000 years of and thinking is, how do I have to live? What makes me a human? What makes me a proper human? And what I'm my sermon is that second question is not a religious question, because it does not imply the idea of, is there an extra material power or not? Because all the elements that we have there, such as grace or forgiveness or honesty or love for your neighbor, are material things in the sense that they do not belong to the extra material. And what I'm saying is that we must not let these words be taken away from us. And I reclaim certain words, such as grace, such as sin. Sin is whoever does not accept or does anything that risks the life of somebody who's gay. That is a sin. We can claim these words back. They don't have to have a religious connotation. It can be considered sinful to waste water. We have big water short in our country at this moment. These words have been so loaded. The love of the neighbor is one of these, have been so loaded with religion that we hardly talk about them anymore. And whenever we do, we feel like we're preaching, or we feel threatened, because it reminds us of the words that we used in our childhood when we were at church. I went back.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that especially the words moral and immoral, and the atheists and secular people I know, because they were brought up in religious communities, they think that the words moral and immoral are synonymous with a God almost, that it's like even impossible to have an objective morality without a God. And I totally agree. I think we should take those words back and show that you can still have morality even without the need of a divine being out there dictating the universe. We have been going for about an hour, so it's almost time. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find more about your work? I did post the link that you gave me in the chat, and I'll add it to the description also.
Yeah, well, that link is going to lead to my website, if anything. My website originally was made in 3 languages, French, English, and Dutch. I stopped that because Google the browsers are automatically translating all that. So if you hit the English-speaking website, it will only be partly updated, but one in Dutch is updated. Yes.
Awesome, perfect. Thanks again for coming on. It was a really great conversation, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you too. Bye, everybody. Thanks, Tom, for your questions. Hope to speak to you again one day.
Absolutely. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.